Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving into one of the most fascinating paradoxes in cinema history. We're going to perform a full autopsy on a movie that was somehow a massive hit and a complete, utter disaster at the exact same time. Yep, we're talking about the 1997 martial arts fantasy sequel, Mortal Kombat: Annihilation. If you've ever wondered how a highly anticipated follow-up to a genuinely beloved original can go so horribly, terribly wrong, well, you're in the right place. In this explainer, we're unpacking the numbers, the wild decisions, and some unbelievable behind-the-scenes confessions that led to an absolute cinematic fatality. Let's rewind to November 21st, 1997. $16 million. That was the opening weekend box office take for Mortal Kombat: Annihilation. And hey, that was enough to score the film a #1 debut. People actually showed up. The first movie back in '95 was this huge crossover hit that grabbed both gamers and casual moviegoers. So that built-in audience rushed right back to theaters to see what was next for Liu Kang and Princess Kitana. So from a purely financial standpoint, on opening weekend, the studio was absolutely popping champagne.
But man, here is where the mystery really kicks in. 4%. That is the abysmal Rotten Tomatoes score for this exact same movie. Talk about whiplash, right? How on earth does a movie debut at #1, rake in millions, and simultaneously earn a 4% approval rating from critics, alongside a brutal C+ cinema score from the fans who literally just paid to see it? To understand this massive disconnect, we've got to look at the incredibly poor production decisions that doomed this thing before the cameras even stopped rolling.
So let's jump right into part one, ambition over execution, looking specifically at the recast and the rush. Whenever we look at why a film fails critically, the best place to start is pre-production, right? That's where the foundation is laid. Well, for Annihilation, that foundation was pretty much built on quicksand. Now, we did have some returning cast members, like Robin Shao as Liu Kang and Talisa Soto as Kitana, but then, just look at the sheer amount of recast characters. The production almost completely overhauled the rest of the beloved original roster. James Remar suddenly replaced Christopher Lambert as the Thunder God Raiden. Fan favorites like Sonya Blade, Scorpion, and Sub-Zero all abruptly recast. J.J. Perry actually had to step in as Scorpion because the original actor decided to go do Batman and Robin instead. Imagine sitting down for a direct sequel that starts the exact second the last one ended, but half the people on screen look completely different. It instantly alienated the audience and just shattered that continuity fans were so invested in. So, what was the driving philosophy behind this movie? Well, producer Lawrence Kasanoff explicitly stated his strategy was to shoot for more. He wanted the film to be 3 times more ambitious than the original. We're talking more fights, more special effects, more Outworld, just more everything. But here's the glaring issue with that philosophy. When you try to do more of literally everything on a super fast-track schedule with a constrained $30 million budget, you are stretching your resources incredibly thin. Ambition is great, but without the execution to back it up, you just end up with a bloated, unfinished mess.
And to fulfill that wild promise of more, the filmmakers decided to cater almost exclusively to the hardcore fans. They decided to just cram in the massive character roster straight from the ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 video game. With a '95 original, perfectly balanced fan service with an actual accessible plot for casual moviegoers, Annihilation just started throwing characters at the screen. You had Jade, Sindel, Shao Kahn, Shinnok, Mataro, Ermac, Nightwolf. It just keeps going. Casual viewers were completely lost. And honestly, even the hardcore fans were let down because these iconic characters got absolutely zero plot development. They'd basically just show up, do a backflip, and disappear.
Moving on to part 2, a critical fatality and the overwhelming dislike.
So, what exactly happens when you combine an overhauled cast, bloated ambitions, and a totally sacrificed plot? You get a final product with an 11 out of 100 on Metacritic. That tiny sliver of a score indicates an official status of overwhelming dislike from critics. And it is incredibly rare to see a major studio release score this low. The consensus wasn't just that the movie was a letdown, it was that the film was fundamentally broken on both a technical and narrative level. Take this incredibly vivid review from Jason Gibner over at AllMovie. He called it an exercise in the art of genuinely beautiful trash cinema. Ouch. He pointed out that while the first film was this fun, guilty schlock pleasure, the low-budget special effects in this sequel were just painfully obvious, which completely turned this epic fantasy into something that felt chaotic and, well, cheap.
And the broader critical consensus, just as brutal. Owen Gleiberman from Entertainment Weekly really didn't mince words, slapping the film with a D- and calling it straight up abysmal and incoherent. Other critics jumped in, pointing out that the movie was basically nothing more than a perpetual chain of elaborately choreographed fight sequences, loosely held together by totally laughable plot elements. One critic from the San Francisco Chronicle even said the combatants punched and kicked each other like jackhammers, but left viewers utterly unmoved. It was just mindless action with zero emotional weight.
Which brings us to part 3, sacrificing quality for business and the smoking gun behind it all. So how does a major studio actually let something so abysmal and incoherent hit theaters? If you've been sitting there wondering why the special effects looked like they were dragged out of a completely different, much cheaper movie, the answer is genuinely shocking. Listen to this quote from producer Lawrence Kasanoff, which he dropped years later in an interview for a book. He said, "I'm telling you the effects in that movie are not the final effects. We never finished that movie, but the studio said we don't care. We sacrifice quality for business." Wow. Just let that sink in for a second. The terrible CGI, the jarring edits, the massive narrative disconnects, it wasn't just bad artistic direction. The movie was literally pushed into theaters entirely unfinished, just so the studio could hit a release date and cash in on the hype. They willingly sacrificed the quality of the film for a quick buck.
And the fallout from that decision? Absolutely catastrophic behind the scenes. It was so completely botched that even the creators of the Mortal Kombat universe felt the sting. In 2012 interviews, both Ed Boon and John Tobias, the literal co-creators of the iconic video game, publicly named this film as their personal worst moments in the entire history of their work on the franchise. I mean, when the creators of the IP are embarrassed by your adaptation, you know your production decisions have gone catastrophically wrong.
Let's look at part 4, the franchise consequences and the long-term damage.
Because a movie doesn't just fail in a vacuum, right? The short-sighted business decisions made here caused some serious long-term damage, even if it wasn't a total financial wipeout right out of the gate. See, the film actually grossed $51.3 million worldwide on a $30 million budget. Rob and Show even had a 3-picture deal ready to go, and Threshold Entertainment was scheduled to start shooting a second sequel shortly after Annihilation's release. But the toxic word of mouth and the absolute critical trashing of the film stopped all that momentum dead in its tracks. The studio quickly realized they completely burned their audience, and that planned sequel was immediately shelved. What followed was basically a 2-decade tragedy for the fans. This franchise just fell into agonizing development hell. After that 1997 release, they kept trying to get a third film going. By 2001, things were so weird they were literally hosting fan polls asking who should be killed off in the next movie. In 2005, a planned shooting location down in New Orleans was tragically destroyed by Hurricane Katrina. Then, by 2009, Midway Games, the actual company behind the video games, went bankrupt, which led to Warner Bros. Purchasing the assets. It wasn't until 2021, 24 years after Annihilation hit theaters, that the cinematic franchise was finally successfully rebooted. And all of the stalled momentum can be traced directly back to that one fatal decision to release an unfinished sequel. And that leaves us with this final thought. When studios decide to sacrifice quality for a quick box office return, when they push out an unfinished product just to capitalize on a release window, who truly loses? Sure, the studio made their $16 million opening weekend, but they killed a golden goose that could have easily yielded sequels for a decade. It's a pretty powerful lesson on how prioritizing business over art can, quite literally, annihilate an entire franchise's future. Thanks so much for joining me for this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep looking at the data, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.